Hello, beautiful people. I'm Chris Maddox, founder of the Wild Woman Project and Wild Woman Fest. And I'm speaking to you today because we always meet like this at new moon time. And we are offered a new moon on Thursday, February 11th. That new moon initiates a moon cycle, which will carry us all the way through March 13th. So here we sit sort of at the threshold of a new moon cycle. And each and every time we can choose to acknowledge it, to utilize it or not, to ignore it, to forget about it. But part of our practice here and our play here at the Wild Woman Project is really observing and celebrating the variation in the moon's expression each and every night. And we do that for so many reasons. And one of the most important reasons that we do this is to acknowledge that in the natural world of which we are a part, we constantly are given these outward modelings of the cyclical nature, the changing nature of things. So the moon, every single night looks a little bit different and a little bit different, a little bit different. But what we know is every 29 and a half days, we can expect the same pattern. We can expect this movement from the new moon time where there's no moon in the sky to this gradual everyday building of light until we get to the middle of the moon cycle. And then we have this sort of glorious full moon display. And then we can expect it will wane back again, back into the new moon time. So when we honor the moon and her cycles, it's a way of honoring our own cyclical nature, our own changing yet consistent nature. We are consistent in our changing, just as the moon is consistent in her changing expressions. So each and every phase offers its kind of gift. And the gift of dark moon time or new moon time is exactly that, the darkness and the newness, right? The beginning. So at a moment like February 11th, which we are gifted with every 29 and a half days, we get a new beginning. And we get a dark moon night. And we can use this as an opportunity to do as the moon is doing and sort of retreat in a way, worry less about expression, and actually take a day to check in with self, check in with our inner guidance, and ask ourselves, how's it going? That might involve, for some of us, prayer to or with whatever we consider to be sacred. And it can involve intention setting, clarity and purpose. So that is certainly the invitation every single time. And here at the Wild Woman Project, for the fun and the play of it, we take on a theme every single moon cycle. These themes always come out of a larger theme that we're holding. So we're about halfway through our To Wield Love series, which is a year-long exploration where moon cycle after moon cycle after moon cycle, we are asking ourselves the question, if love is in fact the most powerful force on earth, how do we actually wield it? What does that actually look like? So this moon cycle, we are looking at a dimension to love, love as a visionary, love as a as a kind of wisdom, as a kind of integrity. And I want to read from this book, All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I've been recommending and I will continue to recommend for the whole exploration, because this is a beautiful book from a powerful voice. And she looks in each chapter at different dimensions of love. And our quote of this cycle here at the Wild Woman Project from the great Bell Hooks is this. She writes, "Living life in touch with divine spirit lets us see the light of love in all beings. That light is a resurrecting life force. A culture that is dead to love can only be resurrected by spiritual awakening." So, in this chapter, she's really talking about, sort of boldly talking about spirit, or the spiritual dimension of our experience. She talks in this chapter about how sometime in the 70s she noticed that it became sort of unfashionable to talk about love in the social or the political sphere, that it was sort of became something that was kind of cheesy. And that over time, of course, we've paid a tremendous price for losing love as something of a value that we hold when we begin to talk about, our purpose as human beings, objectives as organizations or societies. That she's basically saying, as so many have that have come before her, that love itself should be a central value and a guiding principle in all that we do. Yet somewhere along the way, we lost touch with that. We lost touch with that. She goes on in this very same chapter to quote Dr. King speaking about love in 1967, which was in a lecture that was opposing war. And Dr. King, who of course was a great theologian, says, "When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental, weak response. I am speaking of the force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality." So Dr. King, we constantly, of course, he was a reverend, and we constantly acknowledge his great gift as a civil rights leader. And here he is really showing off the part of himself and his education and his study that is the theologian, that says, like, when I'm talking about love, this is not some soft something. Uh, According to the great religions, this is seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. So when we talk about or ask the question, how do we wield love, it has the potentiality, when we say that, to represent perhaps the most profound, illuminating, unifying force that exists. And so, to go back to what Bell Hooks wrote, a culture that is dead to love can only be resurrected by spiritual awakening. I think in a lot of ways, what we have been going through with the pandemic and what we are going through with the climate crisis and the things that, the ways in which it is at its best guiding us to ask big questions about what is most important to us, what is most dear. Um, and as we watch structures be really shaken and in some cases crumbling, and we ask ourselves, what kind of a world do we want to build for our kids and our grandkids? And if we're lucky and if we care for the planet, our great grandkids. Who do we want to be? What kind of policies do we want to support? What kind of citizens do we want to be? What kind of parents do we want to be, and coworkers and community members? Like, this is a time where the best possible outcome from all of this is that we have a massive spiritual awakening, and that is an awakening of consciousness. We cannot go to change the outer structures without deeply asking in and reorienting our inner beliefs, our inner value system. And every single time we allow ourselves to love this place, to love the water, and to love the trees and the animals, to love the children no matter where they're from or what religious doctrine they're born into or what color their skin is, that we love them. And the more we step into questioning when our actions, intentionally or unintentionally, are unloving or harsh or hurting people or beings on the other side of the world, when we call ourselves into honesty and we ask our conscience, our, like, the wisest part of ourselves to come forward to help us grow, love can be right there. Love can be right there to help us, not just as like a fluffy concept, but when we connect to our sincere, perhaps even visceral love of the planet and its inhabitants, it changes the way that we perceive things. There's a way in which, to the degree that we allow ourselves to love this world, that the volume is turned up on what we feel inspired to do, you know, uh, what research we want to look into, what books we want to read, you know, what contemplations do we want to sit with, what prayers do we want to say or write or dance. You know, we are living in a time of extraordinary access to information. And when we anchor ourselves in love, there's a way in which we can transmute mere information into actual wisdom in positive action. I think one of the great big challenges that we're up against. Those of us who believe in love as an orienting principle in family and community and society, in commerce, in religious tradition and spiritual paths. For those of us who really believe and who are really going, I'm here to wield love, and I'm trying to learn how to do that better. You know, we have to consider what we are up against. I think of like two of the most famous exemplars of people who are the world over beloved and celebrated for their extraordinary ability to wield love. I think of Jesus Christ, arguably maybe the most famous guy in history, right? And there's a scene in the Bible that I feel is extraordinarily important and profound to contemplate in these times that we're living in. And I don't feel like it gets as talked about as some of the other parts. But there's a scene in the Bible where Jesus walks into the temple, where there are merchants set up and selling things and exchanging money and their coins and stuff. Jesus sees this and gets so upset, so mad that he flips over a table. Coins go flying everywhere, and he is shouting at the merchants. And he is saying, "You have made my father's house a den of thieves." And not that long after that, he was publicly executed by the state. I have to acknowledge that Killer Mike, who is an amazing activist and Atlanta entrepreneur and gifted rapper, has a line in one of his last albums from his hip hop group called Run the Jewels. Never forget, in the story of Jesus, the hero was killed by the state. At the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by the state, he was talking about income inequality. He was organizing a labor strike. He was opposed to the war in Vietnam. And he was considered such an extraordinary threat that he was murdered. So when we talk about how do we wield love as an animating, organizing principle that sits at the heart of our structures and of our society, what we have to be very real about is that there are certain powers that be that so oppose that they are willing to publicly execute leaders, which is perhaps how we got in this situation in the first place, because people saw the links that those powerful forces are willing to go to stop that. And as Dr. King pointed to, love is not weak. It is powerful. It is powerful. And the more of us that are willing to do the inner work and to do the small, mundane, everyday work of integrating love into our lives and into where we choose to spend our money, what we choose to give our precious attention and time to. When love runs underneath everything that we do, and we get that going on a massive level, who knows what is possible? What we do know is that, particularly with the climate, the clock is ticking. We can't just wait for some other generation to take care of it for us. We can't. We must ask ourselves, how do we want our descendants to look back on this moment, like this decade? I keep thinking of 2020 to 2030. What we do in this 10-year period of time, especially as it relates to the climate. But the climate, what's going on with the climate, is tied up with what's going on politically. It's tied up in capitalism, money systems. What's going on with the climate is kind of like a catch-all for a lot of things that need to be looked at. And there is no doubt when it comes to the climate that we need radical shift. That is our great mother, Earth, saying we need radical shift. So this new moon, the invitation is to take to heart this idea that bell hooks brings, living life in touch with divine spirit lets us see the light of love in all beings. So can we see the light of love in the trees and in the ocean creatures and in the immigrants coming into any border, and in the best of us, in the worst of us? Can we see the light of love in all living beings? And that light, when we see it, is a resurrecting force. So that we're taking on this invitation that she says, a culture that is dead to love can only be resurrected by a spiritual awakening. The invitation this moon cycle here at the Wild Woman Project is to take seriously that call, to really, if you so choose, ask spirit, whatever your concept of the sacred is. For me, I just call it life, because I can conceive of nothing more sacred. So I say to life, teach me how to love better. Teach me love's wisdom and love's power. Tell me what to look into, what actions to take, what to let go of. Teach me, teach me, teach me. So you can, if you so choose, take up a prayer of your own, an ask of your own to whatever it is that you consider to be sacred. And really partner with love, which is a powerful, powerful force. So if that seems like something you want to explore a little deeper, the theme of all of the Wild Woman Project circles that are happening around the globe is Love Sees, where we're really looking at this. Love as a spiritual awakener, love as a source of wisdom. So you can find underneath this video a list of all of our facilitators who are leading live. Many of them are on break due to COVID, but you can also see in the link below this video all the telecircles that are happening. So you can join one from online. There are, dates and times, and just follow the links, and there will the information be. My second announcement is on March 10th, we are going to have Wild Woman School. And our subject for this Wild Woman School is called Meditation Experiments for Wild Women. So we are going to really look at meditation from the vantage point of the wild woman archetype and wild woman spirituality. So I'm going to offer you a multitude of things to think of and different techniques to try. And my hope is that you leave that session with like 3 meditation techniques in your pocket that you're really excited to experiment with. Because meditation can be such an incredibly powerful tool for that inner vision and that inner wisdom. And last but not least, on the horizon this spring, we will be leading our spring circle leader training course, which is a all online 7-week journey from right where you are to facilitating your very first circle. We explore so many dimensions of both connecting to the wild woman archetype, to the moon, to the natural world, and also skill building for leading a potent women's circle. So how to lead a meditation, how to craft a ritual, how to make a compelling invitation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if that, the idea of leading a women's circle or going deeper into this work seems exciting to you, check out the link below this video and get on the email list for Circle Leader training updates, because we're going to be announcing registration soon and the official spring date. So you'll want to get on that list. Thank you so much for listening to all of this. I want to close with Dr. King's words. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of the force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality.